Greetings, I'm Gary Bowles. I'm the Chair for the Future Work with Singularity University, and I'm looking forward to walking through a bunch of insights about what has happened in our suddenly distributed and remote working world. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in Korea today. I've actually not had the chance to visit yet, but I'm looking forward to, in the future, our friends at Spark Labs have invited me to come join you at some point in the future. I hope that earlier today you had a chance to hear from my friend Henry Chesbrough talking about open innovation. And we're going to be exploring a range of facets of the diamond now in this and the subsequent session about our remote working world. So we're about to close the books on what has really been in many ways a unique and historic year. I don't think at the beginning of this year many of us knew what the phrase shelter in place or personal protective equipment might have meant, but suddenly now we've all been forced to adapt to exponential change. So I want to talk a little bit about what that process sort of looks like, why I call this the Great Reset, and what the opportunities are for us around how we are going to be working in the future. So as I mentioned, I'm Gary Bowles. I'm the Chair for the Future Work with Singularity University, which is a global community that's focused on helping to understand the ways that what we call exponential technologies and strategic processes can help a global community of change makers to be able to build a positive future. I have a consulting practice called Charette, where I dive in on a range of different projects with corporations and governments around the world. And then I also have a small software company that's focused on career change from a book called What Color is Your Parachute? So sort of a macro view with Singularity University projects with my company Charette, and then understanding how humans go through change in work, sort of at the individual level. If any of the ideas that I offer today are interesting to you, I've got 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning with about 1/3 students, and my site gbowles.com. I've got links to pretty much all of the different ideas and articles that I'm going to be talking about. So I said with Singularity University, our focus is on what we call exponential technologies and exponential change. Well, what does that mean? I think, again, before the beginning of this year, not many of us saw sort of an exponential curve. And then when we saw the infection rates of the virus in so many different places around the world, we understood what happens when things double. Well, we've had that experience before with technologies such as these digital distraction devices that we all carry around. I call the mobile phone. Essentially what happens is you see the performance or the price drop or the capacity, the expansion of the use of different technologies suddenly doubling over and over again, month after month, and increasing at this exponential rate. And this is actually with the way I think our human lives have been in the past 100, 150 years. We've had exponential change with technologies. Many of the technologies that we sort of take for granted are really pretty much within the past 100 to 150 years. And we stand now on the cusp of so many amazing technologies that are going to transform our lives even more. The flying cars that we were promised, there's actually talk about building a flying car airport outside of Atlanta here in the United States. We're at the process, we're about to have a network of satellites that will allow us to have internet access pretty much anywhere in our world. We're creating artificial intelligence software that is more and more human-like in its capacity. We're talking about going to colonize other planets in our lifetimes, and of course robots. Lots and lots of robots. Robots to deliver things to our homes, robots to gather crops in farms. And as a matter of fact, if you had asked me back at the beginning of this year, what was most people were concerned was going to have the biggest impact on work, well, of course, robots. Robots and software were going to take all the jobs. Robots and software were going to change the way that we work overnight. Well, and then along came a virus. And so, but what I was saying earlier this year, what I've been saying for years is, sure, technology has a big impact on how and where we work. But really, what is having an even greater impact is essentially the pace of change, that is the speed at which it changes, which we know is increasingly more like exponential. But it's also the spread of change, that is the big leap of change. If I was a coal miner today and I wanted to suddenly get a better job in the most in-demand work, I would become an artificial intelligence programmer tomorrow. But that's a big leap in terms of skill set. Yet we've known that it's those two twin forces, the pace of change and the spread of change, that were having such a big impact on work. And then along came a virus. So back in March, I wrote an article that I called The Great Reset. And what I wanted to offer was some thoughts about this era that we're suddenly going through and what the likely phases of it were likely to be. So it was pretty much guessable at the beginning of this year. If you look back at previous recessions, previous resets, they sort of fall into three phases. There was a falling off the cliff phase where we're just trying to survive. There was a period in the middle where we're sort of riffling along the bottom. Suddenly we're turning the lights on. Oh, we can all get together again. Oh, no, we have to turn the lights off. No, the virus is spiking again. Certain economies were going to do very, very well, and certain economies were going to have really substantial challenges. And then there was going to be this hopeful third phase where we can actually build better. The problem was going to be that in many cases, there were those who were going to do really, really well. That is, they would sort of shrug off the impact. They could work remotely. They still had jobs, and others would not. Certain countries that were going to continue to be in lockdown. So what ended up happening, of course, is this affected different geographies and different industries in different ways. Well, how did that happen? Well, if you think of the range of industries in Korea and in other countries, all the different various aspects of our economies, there's a range of industries that were deeply impacted because they were place-based. That is, they required us as humans to be in a place doing a certain thing. And of course, some were heavily place-based, such as, I can't be a waiter delivering food remotely. I've got to do it in person. But there are others that we could make a little bit more remote. Oh, like education. Not ideal, but at least you could do something instead of nothing. The challenge, of course, is that we all have sort of fallen into this model of work. And I think we need to treat that as a reset. As a matter of fact, I think we need to question some of the basics about work. So for instance, a commute. Why was this ever a good idea? Why was getting into traffic and being around thousands of other people all in cars going to the same places ever a good idea? Why was our big cubicle farms ever a good idea? I'm sure there's all sorts of neat things when we're working together and bumping into each other in the employee cafeteria. But also what we created was this model that came from the industrial era of what I call management by surveillance, where essentially to believe that somebody was working, to trust that somebody was working, you had to see them in person. And then again, of course, along came a virus. So in that great reset, what happened then is there's a range of different work that suddenly became remote-able and work that did not. So our friends at a company called Fathom, which is a software company based in Australia, they actually did a study. They used their software to evaluate a range of different jobs. And I know this is hard to read on your screen, but basically down at the bottom, those are jobs that were really, really hard to make remote, like food service and working on landscaping. And at the top, things were much easier to be remote, such as being a secretary or a customer service rep. So if you think of it this way, more remote versus more in person, that was kind of the difference between these different work roles. And then if your work allowed you to use more bits, that is to be more digital, or to use more voice, that is to talk to people, you could be more remote. But if it was more atoms, that things you had to touch, or more touching people actually in person, being there with them, you had to be more in person. So it was not remoteable. So this is what happened with the Great Reset, is so many different roles, work roles, became suddenly evaluated by how much they could or could not be remote. And increasingly, the ones that had to be in person, we had to figure out how could we break apart, how could we unbundle those work roles so that they could be done at least in part from remote. Well, we're going to talk about unbundling because the truth is work was unbundling already. Well, how did the Great Reset, how did that affect work? How had work already being reset? And what are the ways we need to reset work going forward? So I think we need to have a new mindset. We need to have a new way of approaching the way that we think about human work. And we have to actually treat this as an opportunity. We have to actually reset not just work, but how we think about teams, how we think about the workplace, and how we think about organizations. And I'm going to run through each of these. And what I'd like to do is I'll stop a little bit early, and I'd like to actually get your questions about some of the strategies and some of the ways that we've seen people are doing this reset effectively. But I'll offer you some of those ideas, and then I'd love to make it a discussion. So I said work was already being reset. Well, how was that happening? Careers were being reset by becoming unbundled. If you think of a traditional career, we had a big chunk of learning at the beginning of our lives, and then a big chunk of work, and then a big chunk of leisure in what I call the period formerly known as retirement. Well, nowadays, a young person comes out of school, but then they might be taking a gap month with their friends, and then they're working at a day job, but then they're driving for Uber at night, and they're working on a startup with their friends. Well, it becomes a portfolio of work, and that former traditional job, that former traditional career, where we had a big chunk of education, then a big chunk of work, we're actually breaking it up. We're unbundling it, as my friend John Hagel calls it. So careers were already being unbundled, but so were jobs. Well, what's a job? If you think of a job, there's a what part of your job. That's the problems and the skills that you focus on and that you use. There's a who. There's the people and the culture of the organization. There's a when. There's your work portfolio that I was talking about and your career path. There's a why, the meaning of your work and your compensation. And then, as we've found, especially in the COVID area, there's a where geographically you do your work, and what your work environment is, your workplace. Well, as I said, before the virus, these were already becoming unbundled. There were innovators who were just blocks away from me here in Silicon Valley, who were already pulling apart all of these different aspects of our jobs. We didn't just have to work with the people we could see in front of us. We could use Slack, or we could use Asana. We didn't just have to learn skills by being there on the job. We could use skills platforms and learn online, or we could work online using platforms like Upwork. So all of these different aspects of what kind of work we did, who we worked with, where we did it, when we did it, all of this was already becoming unbundled. And then the virus accelerated that process, especially when we think of where we work. It hit the reset button for us. Well, so how do we think about work? How can we think about work and how we could make it different? That is, how can we ensure that people are able to continue to do work, especially in an era where we still have those robots? So think of work as basically being three very simple things. It's a problem to be solved, whether it's a complex market entry strategy or a dirty floor. How do you solve the problem of a dirty floor? You go get a broom. Those are tasks that you perform. And then finally, we have our human skills. So that's kind of it. Our human skills applied to tasks to solve problems. But you can actually break work down sort of into 4 different categories. So let's take those tasks and those problems and let's put them on a grid. So think of, on the left-hand side, the tasks that we perform, from being very repetitive at the bottom to very unique, new tasks every time we do something. And then the problems to be solved as being very repetitive, on the bottom, at the left-hand side, or very unique, requiring creative problem solving. So if it is a repetitive task and it requires literally no creativity to solve it, well, that's not very fun work. Of course, we all need to do that kind of work, but it's not very fun. Now, if it's work that we're actually doing unique things, but we're solving the same problems over and over again, that might be a little bit more interesting. But if it's unique problems to solve that require creativity, that's more interesting. And then especially if it's unique tasks to solve unique problems, that's where we use our human superpowers. And as a matter of fact, it's critical that we think that way, because this is how skills are changing. Think of all the skills. This is from the World Economic Forum. Think of all the skills in the lower left hand that are repetitive tasks, that require manual dexterity, that require us doing the same thing over and over again. Well, that's really the realm of robots and software. And in the upper right, those skills that are required to do new things, creative problem solvings, use our emotional intelligence, those are the realms of humans and their superpowers. Because yes, this is what's going to happen as more and more artificial intelligence and robots are performing those repetitive human tasks. We need to move to that upper right. We need to focus on the work that requires us as humans to have superpowers, and not just to be able to create more and more of that meaningful, well-paid work, but to give humans to continually learn how to do that so that they can maximize their human potential. This is absolutely what our opportunity is in the Great Reset of work. How do we maximize the potential of every human in an organization so that they can solve new problems? And rather than using technology to automate all those human tasks, those boring ones, sure, we're going to go ahead and do that. But we can use technology to help augment humans and give them superpowers, to help them to solve problems more quickly, to learn faster, to collaborate more effectively. That's where we can channel the energy of our innovation so that we help humans to be able to solve more problems. So if that's how we reset work, well, how do we reset teams? Well, what is a team? I mean, a team is basically just 5 things, I think. And this is from a woman by the name of Rachel Zombeck at the Blum Center. She basically says it's 3 things. I'm sorry, it's four things. 3 things plus 1 that I've added. A team is people committed to a common purpose. They're interdependent. That is, they have a coordinated effort for what they do, and they're accountable to each other. And then I add 1 more to that, and I say, but they must be able to dynamically bind around problems. Remember, I said work is ultimately just human skills applied to problems. So a team has to be a group of people who will increasingly be more and more remote from each other, more distributed. I don't actually use the word remote all that much. I talk about distributed workers. Remote workers kind of makes it sound like, oh, there's somebody who is far away, but we're all here together. We don't want to treat those workers as remote. We want to treat them as distributed. They're all part of the same team. And we must ensure that they're all working for a common purpose. Their efforts are coordinated, they're accountable to each other, and they can dynamically bind around problems. But we have to add something else, especially in this era, and that's that we must have diverse and inclusive teams. So there's a great phrase by a woman who wrote a book called Moving Diversity Forward. She says, diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to the dance. We need to create far more inclusive teams, because we can do that now, as we have the ability to redesign how teams work, not just by the people who can all be under management by surveillance in the same place, but people who can be working digitally in distributed fashion. We can actually help them to dynamically bind around problems much more effectively. We can hire people in remote places we wouldn't have hired them before, because they can be part of a distributed team much more effectively. If you want some great ideas on how to do this effectively, I'm going to point you to 2 different books. There's a great book by my friend John O'Dwyn called Distributed Teams. Again, not remote, distributed teams. And then my friend Kelly Stephen Weiss, she's written a book called The Inside Gig, helping organizations to think about how they might revamp the way that they link teams and their talents together. All right, so we've reset work and we've reset careers and teams. Now we're going to reset the workplace. How do we do that? Well, what we've done in the Great Reset is we've said in the past, we thought work had to all be co-resident. That is, we had to have everybody in the same place, and we had to have a mentality that it was static. That is, the workplace design was essentially the same yesterday, and it's going to be the same tomorrow. So both of those things have changed in how we think of the workplace. I think we've all come to realize the workplace can be anywhere. But if one of the greatest insights that you take away is that you now have an unfettered access to talent. The globe is increasingly more your talent pool. Think of what that means. Jeff Maggioncalda, who is the CEO of Coursera, was on a Zoom webinar last week with me for Singularity University. And what Jeff said is, I now am thinking completely differently because my workforce is virtually unlimited. That is, I have access to workers all around the world. That is a stunning insight for so many leaders. But it's not just that the worker pool has expanded. We're still going to be working together in places. It's going to happen. We're going to, we have a response to the virus, and we've got a vaccine that will allow us to be able to slowly put the pieces back together. We're still going to be revamping the workplace. We're going to redesign the workplace on an ongoing basis. And it turns out technology can be quite helpful. This is actually going to be something that's going to be discussed in the subsequent panel, is about redesigning the workplace. But there's a great technology by companies like Autodesk. Autodesk has actually a process called generative design, where it takes all the needs of different workers in a workspace and runs through literally tens of thousands of different workplace layouts. And increasingly, of course, an additional factor will be the safety and health of those workers. And it allows workplaces to be reconfigured dynamically on an ongoing basis. So think of the workplace now as a much more fluid space where humans will be able to collaborate on a much more effective basis. All right, so we've reset work, we've reset teams, we've reset the workplace. Finally, we have to reset organizations. Well, how will we do that? So I'm going to walk through some thoughts about how we reset the organization, and then I want to make this a discussion, because I really do believe this is all about how. This is how each of us will treat this as an inflection point, an opportunity, a start date to do these kinds of resets. Resets in our own careers and our own work. Resets in how we design and manage and coordinate teams. Resets in how we design the workplace, and ultimately resets in how we design our organizations. So the old model of an organization, which we inherited actually from the industrial era, essentially was what I call the box. There was scarcity inside the box. That is, only a certain number of jobs. And the way we managed scarcity, of course, was with a corporate hierarchy. And then there's abundance outside the box. Abundance, as my friend Peter Diamandis at Singularity University calls it, where there's lots of people that want to work, but there's only a few jobs inside. So we had to create these boxes. And increasingly, in a world of constant and exponential change, there are all these other kinds of workers that can be doing the work of the organization in addition to traditional employees. So it's not just that standard worker role, but there are contractors, consultants, gig workers, subcontractors, part-time workers, workers on cloud teams, crowdsource. There's all these different use cases for work. And the box of the organization is no longer sufficient to handle it. So I say that the new work model is what I call the network force. We've gone from a workforce to a network. And the organization of the future, what I call the next organization, is going to have to be designed in a way that can leverage all these different skills of all these different use cases for work to be able to solve the problems of the organization's customers and other constituents. This is a tremendous opportunity for organizations and for leaders, especially in the Great Reset. Well, how do you do this? How will leaders do this? You must double down on vision, the vision for your organization, the problems you think it is meant to solve. You must double down on culture. You must ensure that you are increasing the dialogue around the values of the organization. You must double down on human growth. Each of us must have a growth mindset to be able to continually adapt. And then finally, as more and more of the organization becomes networked, we must double down on alignment. That is, on the connections between all the different people solving the problems of the organization. So that actually is a superpower of leaders, of those who lead organizations, alignment, ensuring that people in organizations are continually connected in the ways that they are solving the problems of their constituents. This is a model used by the company Asana, which actually makes alignment software. And it basically says it's sort of a pyramid. But basically, essentially a leader, somebody who leads an organization, is trying to build continuous alignment between the organization's mission, its strategy, its objectives, the business and other objectives of different work groups, and then the deliverables of everybody within the organization. This is the opportunity for you as a leader in an organization in the Great Reset, is to continually align your organization. So we've talked about reset of work, the reset of teams, the reset of workplaces, and the reset of organizations in a rapidly distributed and remote world. But we know that technology is still going to continue to have a massive impact, but technology can actually be the enabler. Technology, the robots and software we've been using to automate so many human tasks, we can actually leverage those technologies. We can innovate and create new technologies that can allow us to continuously and dynamically bind around the problems of our organizations. And for each of us, whether as individuals or for those who lead within organizations, we can double down, we can renew our commitment as the opportunity to be able to continually maximize the potential of every human. As I say, in the world, in a suddenly remote world, how can we ensure that no human gets left behind? So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would love to hear your questions. I would love to hear your thoughts. You don't have to agree with anything I've said, but I'd love to delve into some of the actual strategies for making some of this work in a suddenly distributed world. Okay, so I'm told, that's great. So I'm told that the Q&A actually, the Q&A has just been, I've been asked to add a little bit more content here. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to jump into another session here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more. I'm going to delve into some of those strategies myself. So I'm going to anticipate what your questions might have been, because since I don't think I'm going to be able to get questions from you. And instead, I'm going to just jump into giving you a little bit more detail around some of these strategies. So let me just hop into this one model that I've got about innovation, and give you a little bit of thought of some of the things that you can be doing within your own organization to be able to continually innovate in a world of exponential change. All right, so, and I'm going to go back to sharing my screen again. So let me see if I've got this right. Okay, great. All right, wonderful. Okay, so I'm asked constantly then, for my organization, it's a suddenly distributed organization. I've got all these workers that are working all over the place. And now I want to continue to innovate. How do I think about building a portfolio of innovation. And I think this plays quite nicely with some of the ideas that you heard from Henry Chesborough earlier today about open innovation. But the basic premise is that in a suddenly distributed world where we're going to be having more and more talents of humans that we're going to be able to leverage, we need to double down in our thinking. We have to have new approaches to the ways that we are helping people within our organizations and outside of our organizations to continually innovate. And just to make sure that I'm being clear about how I think of what that deliverable is, think about the organization as essentially creating value, solving problems for a range of different stakeholders. Now, we all know there are customers, but in many organizations, there also are shareholders. There are also workers. There are partners. There are the communities in which your organization functions. We can even think for many organizations, the planet is a constituent of all of us in our societies. So this is how we think about building a portfolio of innovation across all that different landscape of the types of value we're trying to create for different kinds of constituents. Now, when we talk about exponential innovation, a lot within Singularity University, that sort of sits on a range of, as you know, because you be clear that I sort of like Magic Quadrant. That sits on it's sort of 4 different use cases. So think of innovation as running from very incremental, that is the very, very basic innovation that you need to do to be able to continue to have your increasingly distributed organization to be able to solve problems, to be able to continue to improve its processes and so on. That's sort of core to your business. That's everyday innovation. You must do that kind of innovation, continuous process improvement. You've got to do that on an ongoing basis. Now, some organizations have innovation processes where they sort of step up a little bit more, and they're trying to do what I call adjacent innovation, like a little bit of new products, that sort of thing, but it's not really breakout innovation. What is going to happen in a world where we're going to be leveraging more and more talent? We're going to find ourselves more and more distributed. We're going to find there is going to be more and more competition. There's going to be more and more organizations that will be delivering value in a virtual way. And that means a lot more competitors, a lot more people that actually have the ability to be able to encroach on our existing markets. So what we encourage those who lead organizations to do is to use moonshot thinking. Well, what does that mean? Well, we all know what the moonshot was when in the US, basically John Kennedy, the president, said, we're going to go to the moon and we're going to figure out how to do that. We don't know yet how we're going to get there, but we're going to get there. Elon Musk, as I said, is actually now trying to do a Mars shot. He's he's working on the process of essentially ensuring that we have all the technology and process and will to go to another planet. Within your organization, you can do moonshots. That is, you can conceive of products or services that you want to be able to create to meet the needs of your customers and other constituents. And you can do what we call 10xing it. That is, you can use bigger and bigger thinking. If you thought that you were going to be able to deliver a new product, how could you deliver that product to 10 times more people or 100 times more people? If you thought you could make it for a certain amount of money, how can you make it for 10 times less money? Or how could you make it able to be adopted by people 10 times faster? So within your organization, you can have those kinds of processes to try to become far more innovative, to build out your portfolio of innovation. And increasingly, you can leverage those more distributed talent pools, those people that are in other areas, the partners that you work with, those gig platforms, the cloud workers. There's all this talent that you can leverage to be able to help you to do more and more of that moonshot thinking. Now, what is happening on the competitive landscape? Well, if you look outside your organization, external to your organization, on the right-hand side of my screen, well, you have traditional partners. And those traditional partners are often innovating as well. But there are also this entirely new, and I know where a lot of our focus here is on startups, is this entirely separate community of people that are creating new value, creating new businesses. Some of those startups, if you have a traditional organization, might be inspiration to you. Some of them might eventually become providers to you, but if they keep on scaling, they might become competitors or they might become disruptors. Well, how does that work traditionally? Well, I use the example of the analogy of sea turtles and sharks. So what does a sea turtle do? A mother sea turtle crawls up on the beach and she lays 10,000 eggs and she goes back in the water. And then a couple weeks go by and a whole bunch of baby turtles are born and they start to crawl down the beach. And then suddenly there's bugs and birds. And so only a small percentage of the sea turtles make it to the water. And then what's waiting for them in the water are big fish, like sharks. So actually, this is what an awful lot of the mindset around startups is. We're trying to create as many sea turtles as we can so that they can be as innovative as possible, solve many, many different problems for customers, and then only a certain percentage of them will scale. However, those that do scale have the potential to have really significant disruption on existing markets. So if you have an existing organization, you're in an existing industry, you have to build a portfolio of innovation that actually works closely with those startups. More and more of your distributed worker pool is actually that more distributed group that can help you to be able to do more innovation. Those individual startups can potentially help you to get insights or have access to technologies you would never have had before, and to help you to be able to build out your product set potentially so that you can actually challenge the strength of some of the larger competitors, the sharks in your industry. Now, if you are a startup, if you're building that sea turtle, what your opportunity is to try to continually find new problems, new services and products that you can deliver to solve the problems of tomorrow's customers, so that you can then 10x that solution. That is, you can be approaching it, not just thinking about solving an incremental problem in a relatively small geography, but instead 10xing your own thinking about how you can reach more and more people or provide more and more services. One of my favorite examples, Singularity University incubated a startup called Biocarbon Engineering. And what they did was they wanted to solve deforestation in many countries around the world. They created technology that is two different drones, one that scans and digitizes down to the inch level a particular area of geography, a particular land, and then another drone that can actually shoot seedlings of trees into the ground. And their model says that they think they can do up to 100,000 trees in a day. That's 10xing a solution. So as we become a more and more distributed world, as you and your organization have the ability to leverage more and more distributed talent, it's critical to think in terms of a portfolio of innovation that leverages that entire landscape. Now, the subsequent panel is going to delve down into a number. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. The subsequent panel is going to delve down into a number of the mechanics of what I was talking about in an unbundled work environment, in unbundled careers, in unbundled organizations, unbundled teams. They will help you to gain some insights in how you might actually apply some of these techniques to your own organization, your own team, and your own life. I wish you the best of luck. Shelter in place, stay safe, and I look forward to an amazing next year when we can all become even more innovative. Take care.